Thank you so much. Go ahead, David.
Okay, so I'm going to start screen sharing and work off a presentation so that there is stuff to look at. Let's see, here we go. Could we practice this? Okay. Are we here? You see that fine? Yes, okay. Yep. So I put together an idea of what I thought we could cover. I want to try to get up to talking about, in the end, what a piece that I came to love, but to sort of bring it into everyone's experience and not have it be something that stands up. A lot of people don't listen to classical music. I always hear this, and I sort of don't understand why. So I'm sort of backing into that question in a certain way, because I find it, as much as any other kind of music, it's offered me a great deal of solace and just love and interest. So here's what, before we start the actual discussion, I wanted to set a boundary on what we're talking about, especially when we get to the questions that we're going to discuss with each other. So when we say music, we could just about mean anything. And that was an open question. I wanted to say, let's be talking about the same thing pretty much. So if we look at these sounds and see how they feel to you, what it does to you, how it transforms the moment that you're in. That's sort of what I'm trying to get at. No matter what music we're looking at, it's a matter of what is it transforming for you. So nature talks to us. So it's sound talking to us in the first place. So I want to start with this natural moment of sound. And if there's advertising, I have to skip by it.
This is a real B&H customer story.
So the sound quality isn't great, but it's still somewhat affecting as a sound to hear and listen to. So whatever that means to you, here's a similar sound, which is also slightly noisy and imperfect. But I started listening to music on an imperfect system in the first place, and I never minded the ambient noise. So here is something else into how do you feel listening to this? What's the difference for you in this kind of sound? So I find it is interesting that these are really similar sounds. If you look on an oscilloscope or if you look at how they're made, these are both honking sounds, but the experience of listening to each of them does something really different to me. So nature and humans have been making sounds, and we're adapted to living in nature and hearing the meaning of the sound in nature. So I want to take apart that idea and say, in this discussion, we're going to separate the two pieces of the sounds we're hearing. If it's a human talking and there's a voice and it's a song, there's music in that, but there's also other content in that. So I want to take the ambient content and look at the part that is music, because I want to talk about how the music part affects us. So here are two more examples to consider. to stop that right away because I could just leave it there for 8 hours. That'd be perfect for me, but it's a different kind of experience that I would also want to be able to tap into, even though that to me is the perfect place in nature. After that, here, just a touch. So Shrikant, you were saying Philadelphia always has a lot to offer. That was Samuel Barber's Adagio. He was in Philadelphia. He taught at Curtis Institute, taught composition here. Yeah, so another Philadelphia boy. So, so what exactly should we talk about? Because we could talk about how sound affects us. We could talk about how nature affects us. And there are more nature videos I would play, but there's so much to cover. So let's say for this conversation, we're considering intentionally human-produced communicative sound, okay? And of course, that alone would include speech, and I want to remove the content of speech. So songs, we should consider songs, but we should consider their music, because I do want people to, think about their what they get out of Bob Dylan and what they get out of opera, but not from the storytelling in the language of natural language, but in the musical sense. So what can music do? I think that's our big question. And if we're talking about the same kind of music, we'll be talking about the same question here. So I would suggest a first answer to this question, what can music do? A simple answer that basically, if you could choose a mood and press a button, I think music can do that. It's sort of an outrageous claim. I'll talk about how it creates moods and also an interest for your mind and absorbs you. And there's aesthetic beauty to it too. But this idea that it almost sounds like science fiction, and Isaac Asimov wrote a story, his Foundation trilogy, the central evil character was the mule. He's a disruptor. And he'd be described as a mentally adept evolutionary exception who had the ability to reach into the minds of others and adjust their emotions directly, individually or en masse. And using this capability, he conscripted individuals to his cause. It's not direct mind control, but a subtle influence over their subconscious. That's science fiction, but I really think that's the truth about what music could do. Mozart could have been the mule because he knew how to tap into what the sounds meant to people. So tonight, I want to, by exploring suggestive varieties of views about music, to get kind of to some of the secrets of our interconnections to music, which are profound. I want to teach esoterica about music. I'd rather see what these ideas, which maybe you're familiar with or not, disclose for your own experience, okay? Anything that enhances the experience is what I'm focusing on. I'm not trying to give a music teaching class. So I'd say keep in mind that music is actually one kind of language, and we're trying to describe it in spoken language. And there's no such thing as a translation of what I'm saying into music. But we're trying to talk about a language. And it's not like going from Spanish to Italian to translate what a piece means. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to look for a way into the listening experience. And what we're talking about is the ineffable. The ineffable meaning there are no words to really describe it. So you have to grasp on the experience of your own connection with music. So my agenda is sort of like this. This is the most wordy slide I have, but we're going to look at the elements of music from the outer world point of view. What is it when you're engaged with music that's going on in the world? Then we're going to look at the interactions. What do these things do to you? Because I want to suggest that we have a superpower. We are evolutionarily super receptive to music and sound. We have a responsiveness that's built in. And I'll talk about this term entrainment, which is something that music therapists are familiar with. Music goes straight inside to us. So then I want to finally get to the experience, the inner world of music, what it invokes, and a little bit technically about how it's spoken of. But I'm not really trying to teach acoustics. That's my objective. It's about the things musicians have to talk about when they do music, which is pitch, timbre, rhythm, and motif. So we'll describe what each of those are, but the point with pitch is that in simplicity of sound, in concordance of sounds that we're experiencing, we feel repose. And as things get more complex and are introduced, just like in any part of life, we respond and we have an internal sense of discord in that complexity, and that creates tension in us. But these words repose and tension in any kind of way. There are all sorts of experiences of those things. So each piece of music can have its own sense of repose and tension. Rhythm is what guides us through our experience. It gives us the time that we experience, and time is our entire inner sense. Music is the art of time. And motif is the use of all those factors together, merging pitch and rhythm and how the voices sound, their timbre, to create meaning. So this is sort of the way I see the layers of things to discuss. And what I want to get to is a sort of understanding in all these dimensions about how music is a direct universal language that is a channel straight into the soul on a non-cognitive level of feeling and experience. It's a lot to cover. So we could start with science and look at the outer ear, the eardrum, which vibrates in the middle ear, and the ossia and the bones and vibrating fluids in the parts of the ear, and the frontal lobe and auditory cortexes, and talk about the fact that dopamine and norepinephrine and serotonin are emitted as you're listening without your awareness. But this is not the kind of discussion that I really think we would get anything out of in terms of understanding how to experience music and how to listen. So I think none of these things on this screen are really something you would go and talk to Bach, Mozart, or Louis Armstrong about. This is not what they knew about music, okay? But they knew what music did. So I want to look at the truth about hearing, which is, and all musicians know this, we're all affected by music. Babies, adults, whatever condition you're in, if you have any sort of contact with the outside world, music is a channel into you. It creates emotive reactions from anxious tension to the greatest calm and awe. Just the sound. Experiences from your past, and you can recall the actual emotions that you had, terror through love, the range of emotions. You associate and go back, and music helps you reach those. Escaping the immediate mundane world, when you turn on a piece of music, if you turn your attention to it, it's a special place. You're inhabiting a different world at that moment. This is pretty encompassing. I mean, you close your eyes and you are somewhere different. This is different from almost any other thing an art can offer you. And somehow it gets into you even without the normal paths that language takes, which are a little more indirect to your emotions and would, I think, be a little more differentiated depending on who's listening. So let's see. If we looked at the medical, neuroanalytic, and acoustic analysis of music, we might do this to figure out what the C chord is. So here is a neurosurgical approach to discovering music. I think if we look at music that way, then we end up finding music like this, okay? And I don't think that's where music is, or even if it's there in some sense, what we're trying to do is not be looking from the outside in, but look at what music does from the inside out, and see how it comes to us and brings us from our inside and shapes our experience. So this is sort of the picture of what I'm trying to grasp to. In fact, to counter this point of view that we're going to, the physical study of the human in itself is going to give us much idea about what we can expect on our own from music. People who can't carry a tune, people who say, I can't sing, I can't hear music. I want to suggest that our ranges are not as limited as we might assume, and that biologically we're not limited at all. So I want to play this entire little piece, a presentation by Dame Evelyn Glenny, who's a percussionist from Scotland. Profoundly deaf percussionist from Scotland who is really widely known at this point in musical circles. And she performs live, she does improvisation, she listens through her body, she listens through her feet, she says. She listens through the air in her whole body. I think that the idea that she's showing is that where music really is. It's not in our ears, it's in our intention. And this sort of counterbalances the idea that our limitations should be assumed from anything physical or anything that we think is holding us back. We have to engage. And I think that as the more I discuss, the more you'll realize that we're always engaged anyway, and that music is always speaking to us. So, and this should help us in transforming our own listening approach. The idea that music is just the particular sound waves that we can describe and talk about as opposed to the inner experience is a little like watching Mozart compose his digital version of the 36th Symphony, writing out what sound waves are going to be produced, because that would be a complete description. All he has to do is figure out the right sequence of 1 and 0s, and that's the piece he's describing. But that's really, we know that's not what's going on. No matter how we parse what he's written, it's more than what's on the page, as Evelyn Glenny said. So with that said, what can we talk about the external production of music and how it affects us? I think it's still worthwhile to look at the perspectives of how music comes into our body. So in that sense, I want to look at the idea that, as it says on the slide, we're breathing, we're being pulled and pushed and mirrored, we're mirroring what's going on around us. And this pulling and pushing is actually literally what is happening in the air for us to hear music. So from one perspective, sound, thus music, is just waves. And in the extreme, according to physics, that's all it really is. That's important to tuners, it's important to technicians and organ builders, but there really are some cool perspectives that come out of looking at waves and their push and pull on us. So I want to look at the question of waves and how do waves become feelings for us? Not neurologically, but listening to different waves and understanding what waves are doing. And this can open up some of our understanding of what we're actually hearing. So waves around us of all kinds bring us into synchronization with them. Their physical presence brings us physically into their regularity and into their irregularity. And this is, again, where tension and relaxation come out of our interaction with sounds. So to get a clear concept of what's a wave is just what you think it is. It's something that's not level, something that's non-constant, like the surface of a lake. We see shapes moving on the surface of the lake when it's not frozen, right? And just sitting still. So it's merely a shape that's moving and coming to you. In water and air, everything moves. In a solid, it's not apparent, but solids also have waves because they move inside just as well. For example, a wave in the Earth's rock is an earthquake, and it has a definite sound-like quality, right? So in every sense, where we're sitting, wherever we are, we're surrounded by these waves. So I want to get a little animation of waves and understand that if you look at the top of this surface in a pool, if you bring your hands together, you pile up water, and that pile then appears to move away from you in a wave. But there's much more than that to the actual wave. The bump traveling, which you see on the mirror surface, is the superficial face of the wave. The wave itself is the pressure, push, the push-pull, which you've made that's now traveling away from you. You can see from the top of the surface that underneath there's a wave traveling. The wave is the thing of the pressure that you've knocked into the water, the energy that you put in, the different kinds of energy you put in. You'll see on a water surface different shaped waves. It's the traveling pressure that's the wave, not the surface. So at the beach, when you go into the ocean, it knocks you down. It's not a huge pile of water rushing towards the shore. If you look at the little circles that are spinning there, that's actually all the motion there is inside the wave. But the pressure pushing goes through you and tries to go through your body. So as you can see in the animation, it's not the water that goes back and forth. It's the pressure that's traveling through. Think of a wave in a stadium as it moves across the stadium, but no one's leaving their seat. Okay? So in air, it's sort of the same thing that's happening. And when you strike a drum or use your voice, it's exactly this sort of traveling pressure wave that comes through little puffs of wind that come out from your hand or from the reed that's shaking or from the speaker, earbud, drumhead, the string, the reed, the diaphragm of the speaker shaking. If you could shake your hand 55 times a second, you would create little waves like this that travel, and you would hear the exact musical note we call A. If you could shake your hand 1,760 times a second, you'd hear the concert pitch A that a violin would have to tune to. So whatever moves in the air, that starts the air pressure, and the wave travels towards you, and your ear at the other end is shaking in the exact same way. So whatever is moving inside the instrument or a voice comes into your ear and reaches down inside your body and directly moves part of your body. Let's see. So even in solids, when a xylophone or a drum head is bent or struck, it deforms and the solid metal springs back, and that deformation creates pressure in the air. So as it travels in the air, it shakes the air, and let's see, even blowing on a flute would make a predictable sound like 1,000 times a second. A regularly shaped wave crest will come into your ear, and this is pretty much what defines the pitch that you're hearing. The regularity allows us to have an alphabet of what kind of wave is coming in, an A, a B, or a C, or a D. The regularity lets us give names to these sounds. So the simplicity of the regularity is a clear and psychologically calming thing. A simple plain note. These pressures come into our body as moving matter waves. Liquid, air, and solid have these matter waves. Now there is one other kind of wave that we encounter all the time. And just as a comparison, this is a little tangent, but we could consider the other waves that are radically different in our lives that we're also deeply connected with, and these are the electromagnetic waves, which are called light when they're visible to us. And although most of the time electromagnetic waves are not in a range we can see, so they're not visible, and we call those radio waves, radar, UHF, VHF, TV, infrared, heat, X-rays, and gamma rays. Now, the operation of all our electrical machines and communication computers, everything we plug in, and the internet are only possible through these sorts of waves. And they're fundamentally different from the waves of material motion from a physicist's point of view. But being waves, let's look at sort of the contrast in our ability to interact with these waves and sound waves. Okay, because little bit informing, and this is what I want to sort of say. I haven't talked yet about the inner experience of music. None of this is something that's immediately yet describing the feelings of music, but I'm talking about our connection physically to what goes on in a musical process. So just my view of this is that we have a superpower in hearing music. If we look at the intensity of music from the softest to the loudest, we have 12 orders of magnitude of sensitivity as detectors of musical sound. This is greater than our range of visual sensitivity. And a very loud sound will shake our eardrums the size of the distance of a cell, and the smallest sound we can hear would only shake our eardrums the distance of an atom. So imagine how sensitively we are evolved to hear that range of sound. Another thing is the pitches. We can hear 13 octaves of sound. Compare that to our seeing range, which on this graph here at the bottom, it shows you only this small section of the electromagnetic spectrum is visible to us. If our ears could only hear that much, we'd hear 1 octave of sound. We'd hear from that's all we could hear. That's our limit. But we have 13 octaves of hearing capability. If we could hear that much and turn our eyes into receptors of that sensitivity, we could see radio waves. We could see radio towers projecting signals, and we could see through microwaves, infrared waves, through ultraviolet and X-rays, almost to gamma rays. That's a big difference. So our ability to recognize sounds and the combinations in their patterns is a real superpower in us. And why do we have this? What do we do with this biological supersensitivity and sound power? Well, I think we're evolved to have it reach us in very deep ways. So let's look at what is the actual internal effects of these are. Biological studies show that there is a wide range of untrained human responses to sound. This is using EMG studies, studying the brain. But it's the same, it turns out for everyone, that the same sounds produce chills and other emotions like threat and calm and arousal. It's also observed that there is direct brain activity in our pain pleasure centers. So our reward centers, the same ones that are engaged in drugs, sex, and addictions. The conclusion here is that biologically, there's a direct physical reward just for listening to music. There's also direct auditory motor system connection. The pulses of sound are immediately sensed by us. This is before even we have any capability to do a language processing. It turns out that we sense gaps between events. This is our sense of internal timing. We experience pulses and gaps, and then we're waiting for the next gap. We experience maybe everything that way. This is sort of the shape of time, that we're in anticipation when we feel a gap, waiting for the next thing to happen. That's true in all of our experiences, and music can directly, of course, use these because it's based on the sound that we're doing these judgments internally. And also it's found that our muscles in our body are recruited and marshaled as we hear these sounds internally. It's part of, that's called the entrainment. This is where hearing sounds, our body responds before we're aware of it. This is obviously related to language and speaking, forming words and speech, communications, learning and memory, especially other kinds of human mirroring, which is how we learn what the behavior of the world is. This kind of timing is part of our essential walking and balancing, and it plays out with music in dancing, that your body is naturally inclined to move with the sounds it hears and that's what dancing is. Helping us move when we've had trauma. It turns out that this music is used in gait training for people with Parkinson's and strokes because the music itself helps the body create the correct timing for balance. It's also used in therapy for stuttering or left side stroke or aphasia, the inability to have linguistic comprehension for people who can't speak. People are observed to be able to pace and pronounce and even sing, even though they don't have understanding of what's happening when there's music used in a clinical setting. So we've all used music and rhythm to perform memory tricks. We all remember how many days are in a month by going 30 days has September, and the answer comes out because you have a pattern of time recognition and memory that you use. Even without understanding it, it's going to tell you something. You turn back to what you're saying. So music reaches in us that way and helps us remember things. It's a technique for remembering epics and poetry, for memorizing literature. It's used for sacred text in order to help them be pronounced clearly and uniformly for people to understand what's happening in ceremonies and rituals. So sound is engaging systematically these pre-aware physical processes of the body's movement. To move, you must yourself create those internal same physical conditions. So you have to train yourself. You have to create a timing experience in yourself, which is generating your own internal timing and music. So the purely beneficial effects for individuals are that these sounds are used therapeutically for dementia, depression, and neurological conditions, and improvement, as Maxine said, mood disorders and depression and neuropsychiatric disorders. So it's a direct effect for people having seizures. They use music in order to arrest the seizures. So maybe this is somewhat relatable in terms of the inner power that music has and sounds have. The other thing, not only as individuals do we respond to music, but it also has an anthropological, social significance. The social significance and meaning of music in communal processes for, of course, mourning rituals, celebrations, solidarity, and expressions. Music drives groups together. Think of dancing and singing, marching and presentations from a social organizational point of view, that leaders and clergy use music. When a group is together, think of Martin Luther King or Pete Seeger, how music is used to have a group and train the entire group to a single attitude, emotional state, point of view. It enhances social bonding because the music itself physiologically reduces stress in the group. This allows group experience to be managed and controlled, allowing a sort of joint regulation of how people participate. Individuals can individually control their own boundaries, how much they engage in the music. Are they going to dance publicly? Are they just going to watch and listen and going to close their eyes? But it's all a shared experience. So this is part of our communal presence in a musical experience. We are also mirroring one another and simultaneously interdependent and vulnerable. If you dance in public, that's a vulnerability. If you in fact, you feel the threat. If you don't get up and dance with it, you feel a certain vulnerability about your own connection to the group. These are heightened in group behaviors and sort of soothed or with music. So there's a kind of natural bonding that occurs. This has always occurred in human culture. Apparently, there are indications that from Neanderthal times, even before language, that there was probably some communication of some kind between people and musical instruments. So the anthropologist Helen Disnayake suggests that it's an evolutionary essential for human life to develop musicality as for groups. And even though Steven Pinker says it's auditory cheesecake, she thinks it's essential part of forming human personality and culture, identity, and forming and transmitting cultural. So it's important to consider what it is for you in making music together, hearing anthems and choral ensembles. Think of informal songs and chants. These are ways that we interact, that music opens us up to other people and their experience. So I think there's this sort of unspoken here. There's a certain spiritual vitality that comes out of acting in music. And it's all the way from the individual physical level to the joining into a greater community level. I still feel a little bit like a salesman promoting music to you, and that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to talk about how it affects you on the insides and to how to get in touch with that experience of music and cultivate that. So hopefully some of these ideas ring a bell, which is you remember experiences that meant something to you, which is going to be something we'll bring out in the discussions. To look at somewhat the musical internal experience and describe it now as the hearing itself, I want to look at the three essentials, the three big elements of music: pitch, timbre, and rhythm. And to make clear what pitch and timbre are, I have a little demo here. So this, I can't reach up to there. Wow, with the screen like that. Yikes, what do I do? Shrikant.
What you can do is that you can stop sharing and start off, let people hear. Yeah.
Okay, stop sharing for a second. All right.
Yep. And then just share just that window.
Okay, thank you. That's weird. Okay. I think it's back now. Okay, so here is the range of pitch. When we're talking about pitch, we mean this. And when we talk about timbre, it's the difference in the individual voices and how they each sound. Even playing the same notes, every voice has its unique sound. For example, okay, somewhat clear. So that's timbre. And we'll talk about pitch and timbre, a little bit about the waves that make these distinctions happen. And let me see, where's the slideshow? Back to the slideshow. Okay. Okay. So pitch is that idea of a single tone, a completely regular wave that makes a clear individual note for us. We're all feeling the waves and we're all evolved to respond. And the physical aspects of high and low pitches are the same for all of our bodies. We're manipulated in our most sensitive hearing area, the pressure in our inner ear. Our superpowers of hearing, it's literally our body being pulled and pushed by the musician's physical actions on their own instrument. That reaches into our ear. It's as though we're being touched from a distance, not on our skin, but directly inside our heads. And if you think about massage or body work and how differently your mental state is, how you react to long, slow, even pressure strokes over slow, repetitious cycles as opposed to a quicker kneading and rubbing cycle, and compare that to a steady, regular pounding on your back between your shoulders and where that puts you emotionally. Or finally, picture very quick karate chops between your shoulder blades and against your back, creating a beat like a pouring rain shower or jets in a jacuzzi. These same regular patterns create different somatic responses inside you. Your internal composure, the heightening of your energy are clues about the reaction that we have to slower and faster waves, these pitches that are lower high. Even when we don't fully consciously discern the pitches, they still affect us. Musicians know how to exploit these sounds right out in the open, how to use them while keeping them hidden from you. You don't even necessarily know what you're hearing exactly. Your physical responses are built in, and you will react. If you are being caressed, you will react. So that's the job of the musician, is to at times caress. In the body work of music, when we ascend from low pitch to high pitch, from volcanic rumblings and breaking of ocean waves to flapping wings or calling coyotes and tweeting birds and screeching eagles up to the highest sounds, these highest pitches, the somatic responses are built into us. The psychological effects of those sounds follow. And what we have in nature, we have available in human-created sounds and music. And so that's the picture of these waves. If these waves are all traveling to the right, I have an arrow showing how they go. The waves on top pass by and slowly bring you up and down. In the middle, it's a little quicker, and on the bottom, you're shaken up and down very rapidly. The water waves are all traveling at the same speed, but the frequency of how often you're on top and bottom changes. So this is the frequency difference, the low frequency and the high frequency of pitches. But there's a further dimension to sound, which is that we can hear more than one sound at a time. So we can combine them in a moment, or we can combine them sequentially one after another. So first let's look at combining pitches together. They can reinforce each other and work together, or they can fight each other and be opposing energies at the same time. So we can repose when we're given ambient, comfortable stimuli that are steady, moderate, regular, and unconflicted. When pitches mix and cooperate, it's obvious. Even if you just take them out of their real context as sounds and look at them as pictures, these intrinsic relationships are evident. So if you look at cooperating waves, I drew these dark lines at the crest of the upper wave. The waves below it, I can tell, will cooperate because they exactly have a similar timing to them. The crest of the upper wave corresponds to exactly 2 crests in the second wave and exactly 4 troughs in the bottom wave. These, as sounds, would all be coordinated and reinforce one another. This is a cause of relaxation. These sounds produce stasis, non-changing repose in what you hear and what your body experiences. I'll play the sound of these combined and the sound of things that don't combine so that you can hear the difference. The historical human awareness and observation of these cooperative sound combinations as being bound up with the simple ratios of simple integer numbers is something that is nearly as ancient as any mathematical knowledge. The archetypical canonical relations were known in the 19th century BCE in Egypt, and the instrument that came from that is called the qanun because of these canonical relationships. But they were also expounded in the 6th century BC in the Greeks by Pythagoras. The explanation in physics as mathematical ratios is not giving us the internal sense of why this is musical. But I'm just outlining this so when I give examples that it's sort of prepared that we're talking about waves, we're also talking about a certain kind of experience. These esoteric facts were actually very well known to formerly educated Western musicians after the composer Jean-Philippe Rameau, who wrote a theoretical method, and his contemporary J.S. Bach, they all knew about this, as do organ builders, because the length of the pipes are determinant for what kinds of waves are coming out. So you can see which instrument plays which kind of pitch by looking at this diagram. An organ pipe would be long enough to produce that long wave. A flute could produce the second wave, and a small flute, a piccolo, would produce the shrill higher sound. These waves have common relationships, and so their names are, these are called the harmonics, and they're related in these ratios that are on the left side. There's 1-to-1 size, is a full size of the large wave. 1-to-2 describes the higher pitch, and 1-to-4 describes the piccolo pitch. Let's see. Okay, so to give you the direct experience of these sounds, oops, where's my music application? Here. This is what the sounds, the ratio 1-to-1 is the note compared to itself. So I'll play the two separate pitches, the note and itself, and then play them together. Sounds like this. That's identity. Here's the note, and it's twice its frequency. This interval is the octave. The 1-to-3 ratio sounds like this. That's 1-to-4, and here are the rest up to 1-to-8. So if we put them all together without the next to last one, without number 7, it's this. If we include the 7th one, then you get a slightly more poignant sound. That's because we're beginning to sense the complexity of combining all of these waves together. The last two that were combined, the 7th note that was added, the 7th harmonic, creates a frequency ratio 7-to-8. This is how Rameau would describe it. And it's something when you use, it creates a poignancy. But there are notes that are even more poignant and closer together. Instead of a 7-to-8 ratio, a 15-to-16 ratio. So here's how it gets more and more poignant and dissonant, and see what your hearing says to you about these. It's a higher degree of tension. We all have that same experience when we want to show when we get to the Mozart. This says my internet connection's unstable. I hope everything's holding up. When we get to the Mozart, he's going to exploit the idea of taking you to these worst cases. It's sort of like saying, I'm going to take you up to the highest point of the Matterhorn, and you just have to step over this crack to get to the next point in the journey. Now, stepping over that crack, your body will quake and you will feel shaking terror. Or if you're standing in the CNN Tower in Toronto and you step on the glass, which lets you see that you're standing, 20 stories above the ground, you get that moment of physical reaction to that experience. So Mozart knows how to create that degree of tension and what to do as a musician to take you there and make it comprehensible and safe. So that's what I want to say about pitch, how pitches lead us to tension. The second element, or second elementary aspect of musical sound, is timbre. This is a particular voice or sound for the instrument of what makes a flute or a human voice or violin or horn sound different. I showed you some examples. Now, curiously, we can combine the simplest instruments to build up sounds of other instruments. And this is the nature of the acoustics, that if we took a flute and we took several flutes and had them all play simultaneously, the flute has the simplest wave of anything, like that shape that I was showing in the diagrams. It's just a sine wave sound. But if you play flutes together, in each playing a harmonic, then you can build up the sound of an oboe merely by combining 6 or 7 flutes together. So here's a demonstration of how a flute played with other flutes becomes indistinguishable from an oboe. Here's a flute sound, then 2 flutes, then 7 flutes. Now here's the oboe. So actually, 7 flutes together equals an oboe. Now this kind of knowledge was, musicians have always known this. This is why pieces of music are orchestrated to make the correct combinations. Mixing sets of organ pipes has been done since the 1500s in order to create these effects. When you don't want a simple flute sound, a simple little pipe organ, which serves as a comforting, quiet background instrument, but something where you've mixed up these groups of pipes together that creates a bombastic complexity in the sound, which is poignant like an oboe. So it turns out that timbre, as a musical quality, is not something distinct from pitch. It's actually an emergent sort of phenomena. It comes from combining pitches, where pitch is the fundamental element. So when you're listening, the compositions are largely expressed in terms of what's happening in pitch, but the composer's art is shading and coloring with timbre. So as pitches alone, the effect on us of lower range sounds, think of the ground shaking or a lion roaring or an adult male animal vocalizing, these impress a certain kind of maybe fear and tension, which is different from a higher pitched wave which would arise in nature from threats like the heightened tension from smaller bodies, a female in a species, or a predator, the predatory bird screeching, right? These are different kinds of tension. And the opposite of tension, the second factor, is repose. As mixing overlapping pitches combine simultaneously into one sound, the non-cooperating notes give us the opposite of repose. Sort of had an idea of what that looks like visually. This is 2 very similar waves that do not agree on where they start from. And this is the kind of interference which visually is extremely disturbing. And that's exactly what a sound wave, when it disturbs another sound wave, would create. These disturbing effects, how sensitive are we as listeners to musical tensions? As a speaker of a language, even without a language that has any formal pitch structure, like Chinese, where you have to pronounce with pitch, you never speak without enunciating a tone. In fact, monotone speaking is humorous, it sounds non-human. So apparently we can all carry a tune. Your speech pattern, vocal pitch modulates frequency, but as anxiety changes your muscular tension, the laryngeal tightening engages higher harmonics in your voice, like in the oboe, transforming rounder sounds into harsher, shriller sounds. And as mirroring listeners, we understand what is happening in that voice. We hear someone speak from anxiety, and your own muscles as a listener become similarly hardened, mimicking the physical restriction of the emotion in the other person's body. Likewise, the presence of edginess in timbre involuntarily, non-intentionally communicates to us and creates a mimicked internal response to the sounds we're hearing in musical emotion. There's instantaneous empathy created through the medium, which is music. So good listening depends on engaging sound in this kind of way, letting it wash into you in that way, and letting your body tense and untense as though you're speaking the music. So simultaneous pitch relations, which create timbre, are also useful to build semantic and more cognitive, thought-oriented parts of music. A pitch can establish a context in a musical composition for what the next sound is and means. A particular sound will express now. That can be different from based on context, and a context is the foundation for having a piece of music have a structure in time. The most basic example of structure in music is reestablishing repose after having disturbed it with the composition, to come to rest at the end of a work, to bring the listener, set them down on the ground again. This is the most basic part of musical expression, is to end a piece and put an end to the wavy disturbance and clashing of energies. A composition has to train the body back down to a restful state. How are we doing on time, Shrikant?
David, this is spectacular, so please take as much time as you need.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to show examples of how repose is created compositionally by using the simpler ratios to finally end a piece, to let you relax at the end. You will recognize with your body, without knowing what the significance of the notes are, that they are allowing you to come to repose. Okay, so let me see if I have things in the right order. Hopefully, this guy. It's a little out of order. I want to get to rhythm next. Let me jump over here. So here are examples. We'll take our ultimate Western composer, we'll take Beethoven as the exemplar. Here is the end of the Beethoven Fifth Symphony. I apologize for having put it on this synthesizer, but it's the only thing that I could conduct here from my home. This is a demonstration of how, after all the perturbations that Beethoven puts you through, in the end, he's going to tell you you've reached the end by using the ratio 1:1, that finality and certainty of identity. Just the last couple measures of that symphony on a synthesizer. So the 1:1 ratio is this sound, and then I'll play the two chords that Beethoven exactly played with that ratio. So here's the pure 1:1 and Beethoven. That's finality. That settles everything that he set up in that piece and put you through. That's 1:1 is a definite, clear finale. Now, using a 2:1 ratio, it's slightly different, but Beethoven's First Symphony ends with a 2:1. I'll give a demonstration. So 2:1, and then Beethoven's 2:1. He's exactly doing what we said, giving you repose by the commonality of those things. You know that you've come to a rest. So that's 1:1 and 2:1. What about a 3:1 ratio? That's still among the most common forms of a Western expression of repose. And here at the end of his Ninth Symphony, the first movement, slightly longer example, and I'll point out how the 3-to-1 ratio sounds. And you can compare that to those other very drop-dead endings. This is slightly less settled. That's 3-to-2. So it can put all of that crashing sound to an end and be clear. So this is a communicative language we all understand. But it's not as settled, I don't think, as those 1-to-1 and 2-to-1 ratios. Those really just set me down, and I'm still riled up from this piece, to tell the truth. You know, it hasn't quite done the same job to me internally. Now, if you use a more complex ratio to end the pieces, I'm saying 1-to-1 and 2-to-1, we all understand the ending. This is a little bit different. Here Mozart uses a 3-to-2 ratio, a 4-to-3 ratio in his Requiem, this Lacrimosa piece. So the ending has a different sense of finality. So here's a short piece of Mozart that ends with a 4-to-3, and I'll show you the 4-to-3 at the end. So that's 4-3. Here's the pure 4-3 and Mozart's. It's a different way of putting something to rest. And it has different connotations, I think, for the listener too. So let me see. I want to show those examples and give you a sense of those inner feelings by having musicians show you how facile these techniques are in setting something down gently or slamming it to the ground and putting it to rest. That's a lot of magic, I think. But we're going on to something different now. The fundamental and really magical power of music, which above and beyond all is about rhythm. And we'll see how thoroughly rhythm trumps pitch. Time relations are rhythm, practically inexpressible in natural languages. It's so hard to talk about. They're the primary content of music. We employ natural language to try to describe time relations, of being present or being absent as a negative space, as a rest in music. The volume and lack of volume, the intensity, the subdivisions of these occurrences, which give us beats, the overlapping and creating of breaks and identities and patterns, or stretching time and shrinking time, recurring and bending, which are effects in time. Controlling changes of tempo, speed, rhythms, and their references to each other. This is all apparent as you're listening, but the words are difficult. You can't translate this language. But as Evelyn Glenny said, that is not what you're instructed to do on the page that matters. So it's what is put into it. It's not the words that we can describe it. It's the effect it's having on us. So good luck describing it. Rhythm is sound and time. It's the most meaning-packed component. It's a complete language in itself, even without pitch and timbre, of expressing feeling, emotions, expectations, recognitions. It's the underlying beats. So how do you experience just 4 simple beats? That's what that's what the other example was. So here's an example. 4 times we're going to just have 4 beats. And look at the difference in expression from something that doesn't depend at all on pitch or timbre. Just 4 beats in time. And look at the 4 different experiences you have of those 4 beats. And I want to give an example of how, with rhythm alone, we will recognize a song. I think that you'll be able to tell what song this is, even though I haven't put any pitches in it to identify it. Did you recognize that song? I would be interesting to take a poll on whether people recognized Happy Birthday to You. On the other hand, here's another familiar song, which I don't think anyone will recognize. I'll be wrong, someone will recognize it. But this is a completely familiar song. We should all know these are the exact notes. Well, I'm curious if anyone can tell what that is. Now, if I played the notes one at a time, it's unrecognizable without its rhythm. So I'm saying that rhythm is the heart, the core, the soul. It's, of course, the pulse of music. We don't need the notes to know what's going on. The pitches are part of a higher level communication, a sort of verbal communication, but the physical somatic communication is happening in the rhythms. So why is rhythm so primary? My answer is that, let me see, I think I can go back to my slides now. I assert that music is the art of manipulating time, that it's the study and the control of time for a listener. And the time being how we live, we feel things stretched out and hurried whenever we're in a rush, whatever's going on. And music can help you experience your own control. Choosing a right piece of music, you can control your experience of time. I know if I'm driving somewhere in a hurry, if I don't put on the right music, I drive like a crazy person. So why is this so important? Why is time so important? Because our minds are time machines. Our minds are the time machines of the universe, creating and forming time and managing every part of our body and our experience in time. Music and its meaning at a deep level, it portrays and manipulates the flow of time. More than all other arts, it uses direct control of time. I could think of examples like Bernstein's America, but we're going to try to keep progressing here. So we all experience rhythm without words. And in a fetal landscape, as in the womb, there is only a soundscape of existence. And hearing is already developed as a child is developing in the womb. Rhythm is our breathing. If we change our breathing, we change our state. Music When you listen to it, you breathe with it. When you perform it, you're always told, surprise, the thing that you need to do to perform is to breathe this piece. Whether you're playing on violin where you don't blow air, you still have to breathe the music. Music is a breathing, and the reception of it is a breathing. It's also obviously a heartbeat. Music stirs your heartbeat, trains your heartbeat, affects your heartbeat and your nervous system, which is your time-creating computer and interpreter. Music also is once and gone. It's not like a painting or, well, any performance art is once and gone, but it's not like classic arts where you can define your own sense of time in experiencing them. Music is lived as it happens. It already has you psychologically and physiologically committed. You don't have earlids. You can't turn it out. You have to completely leave it. So you're naturally embedded inside music. It begins by putting you in a private, safe space. It isolates you from the real world. It's threats and problems. When you turn something on, if you go home and you want to have a completely controlled experience, music is a channel to that. It commits the mind to having a time for itself, which is a challenge to us, right? In this world, to take time for ourselves. To turn to music is one way to do that. Music is performed by the internal visualization of the piece. The singer, the performer hears, feels the piece, and puts their body in through that timing, and then invokes the same internal result in the listener. The vocalization is in the listener as they hear it. Their larynx, their vocal cords, you can open yourself to fully feel, and as though you're repeating or singing along. Your breath, your heart, your tension, and your anticipation all respond as being part of the music. And the music is physically helping it. Music is the voice, but already it's inside you, right? We all experience a voice inside, but we can listen as a resonator and mirror with our internal voice as we listen. So as a language, its power is built into us. It causes mirroring in infinitely many ways. This entraining that even happens when you don't have your cognitive faculties. By invoking the mirroring, it spurs abstract awareness, anticipation, and your engagement in that is actually a kind of creativity. You create the next experience that's going to happen, and the music fulfills that expectation. You're creating music as you listen to it. And music is saying, yes, that's what's happening, or no, it's not. So you're constantly engaged in a creative act as you listen. It's a very demanding thing to fully engage with music, it sounds like. But I guess that's what I'm saying, worthwhile, right? Your feelings may vary, but your well-being and comfort from a piece is a fairly predictable thing at a very basic level. I think we've seen some of the causes for that in how the waves themselves express certain things objectively. It's also true that these causes are very deep and these effects are very long-term inside us. I remember my mom, who developed Alzheimer's for a long time. She couldn't even recognize pictures of herself and things like that. And I would go, and if I played the music that she was used to listening to my father play, she would just immediately understand what was going on or sing some of the music. I mean, she couldn't recognize herself in the picture, but this experience is so deep inside you, you know, and familiarity and pleasure that I can't describe to you. It also transports you to places you've been, times that you've been and other places as full environments. You re-experience those feelings. So it has a dreamlike quality on the mind by taking time and allowing you to enter that space. So recall what power music has had for you in anticipating and pacing and remembering things, because music alters time. Let's see. The last. Let's see. Did I cover this slide? Yeah. The last aspect I want to cover before we go to Mozart, if there's time, is the engaging of something else besides just feeling, which is thought and contemplation beyond emotion. So you get the emotional experience, but music can also engage you in a thought experience, which is you can watch the complexity of a structure and be aware of it. Even when we're not aware that we're thinking, the sequential presentation of pitches puts us into a different relationship to music than just the finality of the chords that I've shown. The sequence of pitches in time is a creation of a melody or a fragment called a motif. This is the more semantical and thought process part of music. The object of the language is now a concrete thing that exists. So we begin to create a larger scale in time for what is being expressed, because with the presence of specific objects, like little snippets of tune that are things to us, these particulars, what are those concrete particulars, individual particulars, they have an identity to us as musical things, and musical structures can be established now building large time structures. With minimal technical experience, these motivic references and repetitions and modifications are discerned through our natural pattern recognition using very short-term memory and become significant to the message of what a piece is saying. Context is now intentional for the creator of the piece and the listener together. So this extends what can be expressed and extends through an entire coherent piece. So now I'm going to do like the last piece of the analysis work. How are we doing on time, Shrikant? I'm going to do the Mozart at this point.
Go ahead, David. This is very good. So please take your time.
Okay. So we listened to Lacrimosa. Okay. I spoke about the intervals that create tension, and we looked at how those sound. It's a little bit funky. I can't. Oh, there's my control. So these intervals, again, we listened to the simple harmonic intervals. But when we came down to these more clashing sounds, I mentioned that part of the composer's job, Mozart's job, is to take you up to these dangerous areas, these peaks in the mountains, and have you pass over these treacherous soundscapes. And here's 4 measures of a Mozart piece. I'm going to point out what happens as he gets to the end of this, how it passes by quickly, but it's actually very dangerous. So, oops, I don't want to change the note. Here's what Mozart wrote. So by the time you're at the end of that, you're not hearing these concordant agreeing tones. You're hearing the most disagreeable combinations of tones. This and this all together. Suppose you played both of those disagreeable tones at the same time, and then they're neighbors, and then you shake those together. Here's what happens, and this is what Mozart is going to put into his piece. Now, I'd like to explore how that happens in this particular piece of music and the structure of the piece as it travels along and brings you to actually expect that collision to happen. I guess it's a little like NASCAR. You're waiting for the collision, right? So, but it's going to be a pleasurable collision. And after you've been at that point, Mozart, I guess, owes an apology, and he brings you down gently from that treacherous place. So here's an analysis. This form of analysis was done by Heinrich Schenker in the turn of the last century, a way of looking at music structure beyond the superficial notes, looking underneath the waves to see what's the pressure that's happening inside the music underneath. So here's a tune, and we're going to reduce it to its basic elements, and then finally to hear what's inside it as its structure. Oops, I keep changing. Oh, sorry. Here's his second theme in the piece we're listening to. Here are the elements, basic elements. Again. It reduces down to something, ba 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 ba. That's a nursery tune. That's a child's tune, but it's embedded in there. Your ear pulls it out. That is the subject matter of the sentence. That is the object that is being discussed. So there's a concrete object now. We can modify. We can look at it from different angles, but it has an underlying structure to it. And the Schenker's analysis says, here's what's going on inside. It's so simple. That's what's going on. And I'd really love to change the size of the screen, but I lost my, oh, this control must be it. There we go. So if this is the whole structure, and Mozart wants to build a piece of that, he could repeat that 4 times, and 4 times is too much, because too much repose, even of something that has a shape, is boring. So it's not going to be boring. It's going to build slightly and then relax. So here is that 3 times, and finally your reward for listening 3 times. That's your playful reward. I hope you remember that, because that little skippy, trippy rhythm at the end is a little piece of ear candy for you. Mozart, having stated this idea, is going to reinforce it so you shouldn't forget it. And here's the way he does that. He puts it in the mirror and he reflects it back at itself a moment later. The same thing is happening. This is a piece for 2 pianos, and it's really fun to watch. One person does and the other person starts interrupting him, but it perfectly fits together. It's a very cool thing. And this is what performance gives that I can't give you with this synthesizer production. So not only does that little fragment have a structure, but repeating it 4 times creates a larger time structure. The first time you hear it, it's one way, and then you notice a change. And then you hear it a 3rd time, it's changed again. That creates an underlying tune, which is also in you. Even without knowing it, you've heard some other tune at the same time. You're building from his repetition. So here, out loud, I have loud playing the underlying structure, very slow development happening under what you heard. So here's exactly what you heard with its underlying deep structure. That deep structure all by itself, which happened over 8 measures of time, is this. And that creates expectations. Whenever you start to hear that, you begin to have expectations. Something has to happen. So not only do you have the tune, you know, that little nursery rhyme, but it's also moved around and created another tune inside you at the same time. This is fairly complex. It's like a Russian novel already. Mozart will add one more element because he wants to repeat all of that again and build up to that treacherous moment. And he's not going to use the literal same material, but building on that already internal structure. He's going to put new superficial, new clothing on it, new guise on it. So here's the original twice with its underlying structure, and then I'll play the underlying structure, and what he places down as a new way to hear it. And this is not meant to be a visual exercise for people to read music. It's meant to be you'll hear the underlying structure with his tune twice, and then that underlying structure, and let something new happen with it that matches it. Here's the twice, and then the structure and the new thing. What's our expectation? Say this new thing has to end somehow like this. So all this understanding of Western music and Mozart without having to study a thing, your body already knows how to do this. And if you doubt that these two pieces of material are actually the same, I'll play them at the same time, and they match up fairly well. So with that as the context of what's going on, let's say Mozart goes ahead and builds a higher level structure on top of that, something like this. Slowly building up what we know in this piece of music has to drop back. The same expectation we've built has to drop back. And we get the reward. If we remember the funky way he ended the first time, we get a funky ending to do that. So putting it all together, how does he build this long upward scale with that new piece of material that sounds like this? There's that clash that has to happen right at the end, and it would pass you right by because all these expectations have become so complex you don't realize he's reaching in your pocket and taking your watch, and all this is happening at the same time. But the anxiety, the expression has happened inside you. You felt this. Now, just to make it beautiful, he does it with two pianos talking back and forth to each other, and I can't really show you that. I wish I could show you on a stage. I will finally at the end play 2 minutes of this piece so you actually hear it on pianos. But here's the way it works out with the expression, the way Mozart did it, that everything should happen at once because you're going to understand it all the first time you hear it, even all the way up to that clash. Well, you put up with the pain and he owes you a big apology, right? Because you've experienced this. Which is really, here's your reward. Repose. Which Mr. Schenker would say, you just came back down the scale the way you were supposed to. All your expectations are fulfilled. I'd like to play the 2 minutes of that piece so you get an approximate feeling of how Mozart actually pulls all this off without a word. So maybe we should just quickly say, music can, for individuals, us individually, it shapes the world you inhabit. You give your whole world over when you turn to music and pay attention to it. You leave the rest of the world. This offers you mood enhancement at will. You choose the piece that expresses what you want, and you can have that experience. There's also just the joy of experiencing something, the sounds itself. We are built to receive and enjoy hearing sound. We cultivate the value of our mindful awareness of music, because if you go through that Mozart and you begin to feel all those forces, you realize how subtle your mind and experiencing of it is as you try to look at every piece, and each one fits with every other one. It's the same sublimity as looking at the Grand Canyon. You can't put it all together in one snapshot in your mind, but every piece belongs and fits together with every other one and informs what's happening next and the way it all will behave. So but these are abstract kinds of thinking. A tune is an abstract thing. So you're challenging your mind to remember 7 things at once, to play a very complicated 7-dimensional game. And that's a sort of internal enhancement. So music individually can do that. And socially, it also encourages enjoyment in social situations. You should go to performances, something like this. I'm saying bond with others, challenge yourself to participate further, look at new kinds of music, and expand your awareness of how other people experience music. So I suggest you experiment, try things, listen, learn what music fits your moods that you want. You can control your own terms. Think of sound the way we're talking about it. It has its own structure. It's a language to you, what it does to you, and give yourself time for yourself to listen to things. It's not that far away. Music is already inside us.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, David. This was one of the most memorable presentations we've had. This is just fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. What I'm going to do is I want to give a chance for people to ask questions. So folks, we're going to do questions and we'll do breakout rooms at the end. So I want to go ahead because it's just so much. I myself have lots of questions, but your questions come first. So go ahead and type ! if you would like to ask questions. Go ahead and type ! We're going to start with Scott. Scott, go ahead. Give me just a second. I need to unmute everybody. Scott, go ahead.
Fabuloso. What a great and well-structured lecture that was, beginning with the physics of it and the physiology, and recognizing that the brain itself is a periodic vibrating motion and time differential machine. All it knows is the timing differences between its firing patterns. And from that temporal difference itself, look at all this quality and stuff that's coming all around us. So I like the way you started it off, and I like Maxine's intro, which was something like therapeutic and changing your mood at the push of a button. That was my first interest, I guess, in anything intellectual while I was a kid, was this promise of occult systems that if you read a certain thing, make a certain sound. And I don't know if you know about Aleister Crowley's brilliant reduction of all the ceremonial magic to mnemonics, surrounding yourself with mnemonics. And then if you arrange your environment in the right way, you can trigger an internal state. And this is the dream of self-help, is to be able to to create an inner mood or an inspiration by taking a pill. And if anything can do this, I think music can, because it's forcing your interior to move at certain rates. And these rates have innate physiological evolutionary grounds that really force us into a state change. So if there is a magical ceremonial, if Crowley is right, music is the medium of intentional state construction. I think that's a really good. So I'm always interested in ways to avoid suffering through technology and stuff like this. So I think this is a good hook for any talk, is like, how can you be happy instantaneously? How could you program your interior using external means? And music could be the way to do it.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. Great observations. Folks, you can make observations or ask questions, and we'll collect all the questions, and then we'll have Maxine and David answer them. So we're going to start with, it's going to be April followed by Evanique. April.
Hi, I was wondering, David, you mentioned the experience with your mom when, after she had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, how music was able to activate some of her memories. Do we know why neurobiologically that works? And if we do, I was wondering if it was connected. I work with some of my students are nonverbal autistic students, and we're able to get them to participate in language with songs that if they hear songs with kind of catchy rhythms, they'll start to sing the lyrics, whereas they won't verbalize on other occasions. Do we know what's going on in the brain that music triggers?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. We will collect all the questions and then we will come to all the answers together. Next up is going to be Evanique. Evanique, what's your question or observation?
My observation is, first of all, I think Maxine and David did a brilliant job. I think my observation for Maxine is that I love how she used her personal experiences to show how music affected her life and how, you know, music helped her overcome some of the most difficult times in her life, especially with her son, having to leave her son at the hospital. That had to be heartbreaking, but she wouldn't let it get her down. Music picked her up. And I always remember, like, music does do that. And David explaining why, like the brain function, and I'm not scientific at all, but David explaining the brain function of it and why that is, that, you know, with the waves and how it goes through your hearing and it goes to your brain and how the physiological effects of music. So I just thought that was brilliant, in addition to the Mozart and everything, but I want to let other people go. But I just wanted to say those were like the two biggest standouts from both presentations, but everything was really brilliant.
Wonderful. Next up is Mike. Mike, go ahead.
I didn't expect to be called next, but let me see if I can formulate the thoughts. I also endorse that this is one of the most brilliant expositions I've heard from Shrikant or anybody. And
I agree. I agree.
First time. You've made a contribution to science here, that there's a book called Gödel, Escher, and Bach, which talks about some of these same things in an abstract algebra point of view. The author did not have the advantage of your examples and the synthesizer, and he also didn't have the advantage of some of the recent advances in group theory that have come out of things. I bet if you sent him a copy of this thing, you have a collaborator that this is beyond my level of discussion, but I think it's something that's worth pursuing. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Next up is Laura, followed by Charlie. Laura.
I'll iterate also that it's a fantastic presentation. I have a couple things I want to think about with you. First of all, I loved it, listening to all of that. I'm curious about octaves, you know, so we have this, you know, these octaves that got formed. And I mean, fundamentally, you should be able to have an infinite number of octaves, right, between the curve, right? So how did these other octaves get formed? I mean, how did that sort of arrive? You have your, you know, your A to whatever, F, G, I don't remember the last one. But so that got somehow formulated and solidified. But then you have, you know, those points where they're, you know, A minor, A major, and all of that and so on between each one of the separate notes. And so I'm curious how that all evolved, you know, in the time period in those days. That was one thing. And the second thing, if I may, which I just have to say that I remember being at Tanglewood many years ago and listening to them rehearse Mozart. And for whatever reason, wherever my head was at that time, I'm sitting there going, this is very elitist music. Everything I see is ballroom dance, you know, people in fancy clothes dancing in ballrooms. Give me Beethoven, you know, sort of music of the people. I was writing and writing and writing, and I was manic about it. But I think I've changed my tune about Mozart a little bit.
Wonderful.
I'm sort of feel that way though.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up is Charlie, followed by Joe. Charlie.
Yeah, I was trying to look up something, but I didn't have the time to do it. But anyway, for me, ineffable means something you can't explain, okay, with words. And another way of looking at it is that the whole is always greater than the sum of the parts. So the left brain wants to take things and have these parts and then build up the whole from the parts. And that somehow or other, those parts will explain the whole, but they never do, okay? So Ian McGilchrist, who is kind of a teacher for me about this sort of thing, talks about this. And I was trying to find a video where he actually talks about music and poetry and so on, because I know they're out there. But the basic idea is that when you do that, when you like art criticism or literary criticism or anything like that, you know, where you're going in and you're taking things apart into the pieces and trying to explain things by their pieces, sure, that's okay for someone who's a practicing artist who wants to focus in on the details, because details are important. Okay, it's not like they're not important at all. Okay, I'm not saying that. But when you speak of ineffability, okay, which I thought was supposed to be the topic of this.
No, it was the topic was what music can do for you.
Oh, okay. Well, I misunderstood that, because
Yeah.
for me, music, the appreciation of music is the ineffable part of it, and if you take that away, then it's like it destroys the whole reason for it to be in the first place.
Okay,
You know, so
thank you.
I just want to say one thing, Charlie. Yeah, that there was a lot of potential to not show you play any music and just talk about it. But I think the point was the experience of it brings that ineffability to you. It discloses something that I can't tell you about. You just have to hear something.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Mike, Michael Amori, Ambika, and Marjorie. Mike.
Yeah, this was really fantastic. Thank you both. I was fascinated by Evelyn Glenny, the deaf percussionist. So I was curious to know, one, was she born deaf? And
No.
two, I think I've also seen her playing vibes in the xylophone. So there's pitch involved. And I was wondering, if she can't hear the notes, does she actually improvise? Have you ever seen her do that within a key? I would be blown away by her process if you had any insight into that.
Wonderful. We'll come to it. We've got 3 questions so far. We'll collect all the questions and then let David take up all of them. Next up is going, because I want to give chance for people to comment and put everything on the table first. Ambika, followed by Marjorie. Ambika.
So firstly, this was all very, very beautiful. And I agree, so much of it is in the body. At some point, I started to feel really soporific and tenderly sleepy, but very much aware of all that was going on. And, you know, they've been saying for years that light and sound are the medicine of the future, but that's already here. It's happening now. So this is so powerful and so necessary. I know I react very quickly to sound. I cannot, when the leaf blowers begin, it really cuts my electric field. And it's really nasty. So, and that's when I shut all the windows and play drums so I can drown that out and, you know, be silent here. So, and voices, when newscasters are very loud, when people are loud, I can't hear them. At a lecture, if the presenter is very loud, I really can't hear them. If it's on, you know, on the computer, I can turn down the volume. But when people are very loud, it's terrible. So music and sound and light, it's just the way to go. And of course, we have the ultrasonic core, the whole brain, the stem. That's the ultrasonic core with the nervous system. You know, I have actually tuning forks that I have used on the body. So yeah, it's just. Do you know John Beaulieu? Do you know of him? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I can message you that, but he, you know, he worked with that in polarity therapy, but the whole ultrasonic core is the whole central nervous system, which is the nervous system of the cosmos. So this was really, really lovely. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ambika. Joe, sorry about that. Joe, you're next.
No problem. And thank you, David and Maxine. This is the best presentation. I mean, at 52 Living Ideas, I really do. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. I have a kind of a question, and I mean, what does music do that language doesn't? And essentially, when you're communicating to people, especially the people that have Alzheimer's or something like along those lines, what is it? What is the fundamental difference? That's my one question.
Wonderful. Excellent. Next up is going to be Marjorie and Maritza. Marjorie.
Okay, thank you. Again, like everybody else, I want to really thank you, Maxine and David. It was just, you brought a new dimension to my understanding why I like music. And two comments and a question in there. One is I just started taking up the violin, which I find very challenging, but just, wonderful. And I noticed that when I play a tune with my violin, the tune, I have a different experience of that little tune than just hearing the tune itself. And I think, David, you kind of explained to me, through this presentation why that is, the experience more engaged in the body. The second is I'm also involved in another meetup group that is in Philadelphia, that's involved in classical music, which I'm really not an expert at by any means, and I'm really learning a lot about. The last presentation we had was on some of the quote unquote new classical artists. And they seem to me using much more dissonant tones and also atonal. And my question is, do you know why that is, as opposed to the more melodic like Mozart, etc.? So that was my question.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Marjorie. Next up is Maritza.
Hi. I just want to say I really appreciated David's presentation, because it's especially the piece of Mozart. I felt that in pulling out all of the separate notes for us and identifying them, it made it almost a richer experience once you hear them all put together. Like it seems to, so, I've always thought that Mozart was layer upon layer upon layer. And seeing that literally each layer pulled out made it just that much easier to hear it as a composed whole, which I thought was lovely. And on a slight side note, I want to say specifically that sonata in D that you played, it always sounds to me like it sounds playful, almost like if you're like playing with your fingers, like tactile. It sounds like if you're attempting to play tactilely, that's what the music sounds like it's following. So it's interesting to hear it, because if it's just a different perspective, if you're considering that there are like dissonant sounds interwoven, makes me wonder how I would reconcile that with if I'm using each sound tactilely. Just a couple of thoughts. I just really thought it was great. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. All right. So I'm going to take these questions one by one. First, let's take Joe's question about music and language. What is it that the music can do that language can't? What is the power of music as opposed to language? Any thoughts, David?
Yeah, Maxine could probably.
Sure, we can go for both. So let's go with David and then Maxine.
Yeah, I'd say that there's, in language, it doesn't mean a great deal to us until we tear the words apart, give it a context, understand, put it back together, what that is intending to say. Whereas the tone of the voice, I call the music. And that is there more fundamentally. It's an envelope of meaning. So even without words, that kind of communication is happening much quicker. And I think you have to say at a deeper level, because it hasn't been digitized into a message and brought back from that encoding. It's been taken in its full blast. So the digitization, if you understand what I'm saying, turns it from an analog message into a reduced piece of information. You're not getting information from music. Your soul is being shaped. Your emotions are being pressed. Your body's being moved around. So it's a really different thing to communicate. Language is so sparse.
Wonderful, beautifully put. Maxine, what do you think?
I think with language, you have to figure out what people are really saying. They can say one thing and be thinking something else. But when you have music, that will affect you. And you don't have to figure out what the music is saying. You just have to zero in on it.
Yeah, I want to add to that because, and this relates to what Charlie, I think, was saying, that when you do verbal communication, it's the words, it's the little pieces that come in. The amazing thing about music is it all matters. It's the whole that matters. It's a different part of your brain. It's a different reception, and you want the whole experience. And it also confirms that there's more significance in life than just the information. It's confirming that the experience is the essential thing, not the little data you're taking out of it, parsing and putting through a sieve, right? It's saying life is different from that. It's big.
Wonderful. Folks, this is a core point about music. So if anybody wants to comment on that, they're welcome to do that. David, I thought you did a fantastic job of dealing with the whole of music, the whole musical experience, using analytical concept with full respect for the whole. And the concepts that you dealt with, like, for example, the role of time, or the fact that music is primary. You know, we grow up listening to it first in the womb. And even language is being carried by the tones and the movements of music. And then words kind of sit on the top of it afterwards. So it's like there is a hierarchy of place of music. And I liked your phrase that it goes straight inside. The music goes straight inside. So it's not as if, it goes through this concepts, you're trying to figure it out, and then finally you get it. No, it just hits you directly. And then it goes from there. So it was wonderful. The next question was about the music and health. You talked about your mom responding to music. So why is it that people respond to music as they do?
Well, I think you're already getting to the point in describing how it's a different part of the world that we're experiencing the entire world, everything around us. The way we would have to survive is to hear everything in the whole world, not just a single message from a single point in a single person's point of view. So the fact that we're all human beings and share a bigger world is not coming across when you're training someone in language and teaching them how to conjugate the verbs and deal with these words, or you won't understand them. You just look at them and you can see they're uncomfortable. They can listen to your voice and tell if you're getting exasperated. I mean, even they don't understand what you're saying. It's the spectrum of communication as opposed to just the digitized reduction of the I think it has to do with the fact that sound is a part of our survival and existence in the world, and it's much more open than what we've reduced to when we think of mere language and words.
Let's do one more comparison between our audio sense and our visual sense, because our visual sense is directional. Audio sense is basically you're immersed, you're taking in everything around you. It is happening in parallel, it is happening continuously. You're just noticing some aspects of it, but there is a lot more going on. So that entire richness of the surroundings, you are in touch with that sense. So how do you see the difference between the role of visual sense in us and role of audio?
It's interesting. And the thing is, I don't know whether it's a human step or a physiological thing to emphasize the visual cortex and its size and how much we rely on it. I think we have to face the fact that we are dominated when our eyes are open by what our eyes are in contact with, and there's other similarity though. There's a passive and interactive relationship in listening or viewing something. The fact with music is when something happens, it's gone. And we tend to have our visual experience be about things that do not go away. I mean, the blue of my cup is still blue. It's still sitting here. And every time I come and go, so it's a different aspect of the world. We're living in a different world, the visual world, than the sound world. So I think the sound world, that big ape is there and he's quiet now. And now he's making sounds. It's like he's one or the other. He's whatever he is changing constantly. Whereas when I look at him, he looks the same all the time. So it's more about the immediacy and presence of something to me.
Wonderful. Maxine, what do you think about the role of visual sense and audio sense in us?
I'm not sure. I mean, I am not sure because, see, when I look at music, I hear it. So visually, that doesn't apply to me.
I have to, let me give you one example of my niece. When she was little, when she was 2, she was very scared of horror movies, but she wanted to watch them. And what she would do is that whenever there was anything scary, she would just close her ears. So I said, why are you closing your ears? She said, because I'm scared. She said, why are you watching the movie? Because if I close my ears, I'm not afraid anymore. It is amazing. Go ahead, Maxine.
Because that's why they put these soundtracks to these films. Without the soundtracks, you don't have a film. They have all these horror films on now, Halloween and all that. They're nothing without the soundtracks. That's what puts the scary stuff into the film.
Yes, so at 2, somehow she had figured out that because the emotion, the amount of information and emotion is carried by music in this context. It's just, all right, let's take the next question. I think this is the first question about Alzheimer's and music. So can you talk a little bit about that, David? Or autism and music?
Yeah, Maxine.
I can handle the autism and music because I work with autistic people and music, and they are very, very intelligent and they respond very well to music and instruments, playing instruments, they can do it. Whereas maybe they can't tune in on something else. They cannot tune into speech if you would have a conversation, but they can tune into rhythms. They can tune into all kinds of, music helps calm them down. I have a friend who lives in California, and she has autistic son. Now the son is in his 50s now, but when he was a little boy, I taught him rhythms. They lived here. And he gets on the phone every day and he recites the rhythms to me that he learned 50 years ago. So they must have had some effect on him. He also gets, during every conversation, he will go through all his notes. So I think it's a very positive thing. And I think if they would use music more with autism, they would have better results.
David?
Right. So yeah, I'm dazzled by the chat. And I also, so your question is about autism or Alzheimer's, these different things, and music. And I'm just relaying without any biological understanding the fact that these are used in therapies because they seem to help with gait and rhythm and structuring your muscle reactions, even for seizures. And because music does all this non-verbally. I think music's a language, but we're going to say non-verbally. It's kind of non-linguistically. You know, it doesn't go through the same parsing. It enables you a different kind of control, and it heightens your awareness of how that control is working in your body. So it gives you a new channel to behave.
Wonderful. Folks, we have time for more questions. I want to bring up one question about octaves. Can you talk a little bit more about octaves, David or Maxine?
You know, I was sort of trying to parse that question. I'm not exactly sure what's being answered. I think the question may come down to why does Western music have 12 chromatic notes and octaves of, you know, 8 steps? Or why do we do that? And I think it's sort of a compromise, because that's not really the pure music, and a violinist doesn't actually play those notes that way. And there is a difference for a violinist between D flat and C sharp. C sharp goes up, it's higher, D flat goes down, it's lower, and the pure tones would never match. It depends on what key you're in, what you're expressing. So we've come to a compromise in Western music to tune a way that is vaguely good enough for every key, and unless your ear is very sensitive or trained, you might not notice it. But in Eastern music, I think the kanun allows for fine tuning of 7 individual grade steps in between every half note. Every half step that we have from C to C sharp, there would be 7 alterations, a half flat, a quarter flat, a half sharp, and you learn to sing these scales. These patterns are called makum. And they use those as their basic and fundamental. I don't know about Indian music, but these are different from the standard Western classical scales. So it's just a convention in a certain sense. Everyone has the 5th, which is the note that happens as the 3rd harmonic. Everyone has the octave. These are physiologically necessary, because on any actual physical object, when you play an A, it's not a pure A. The thing vibrates. You always get an A and the higher A and a little bit of the E. It always happens. So if you're fighting that, you're fighting nature in a sense, which I think modern composition tries to go beyond what's natural and go to dissonance and say that there's a concept here. I think they get away from the actual sound, which to me means this music is very hard to listen to. It's a challenge for me. And modern music, I think the repetition, it can begin to talk to you. But it's not like Mozart. There's no gentleness in it. They're not looking for the aesthetic surface communication and beauty. They're looking for something else. What kinds of tension? Because our society is a more tense, I think there's more conflict that they're expressing, and this is why the music actually reflects a society. You know, the dissonance is necessary in order to talk about our society. And whereas Mozart, he had such a vocabulary, even with the simple degree of dissonance that he'll employ, he piles it on in such a way that you have this fractal experience of time and structure. And that was enough for that kind of expression. I think there's more to develop in that, and I think modern music is very challenging because it doesn't utilize that.
Wonderful, thank you. Next up is going to be Iman, followed by Scott. Iman.
Hi, I just want to comment about the biological aspect of why music is easier for an autistic person or a person with any mental incapacity to deal with. Well, I'm a medical anthropologist. I'm also a nurse. So there are certain pathways in language when we hear a sentence and respond, and they're quite complex. And these include, so you're hearing something, you're deciphering every word, and then you're formulating an idea, and then you're expressing that idea. And the passageway is extremely complex. And you appreciate that if you observe someone who's actually losing their memory, or if you watch someone who is slowly going into Alzheimer, you see, for example, that they start reading every word separately in the newspaper, for example, as opposed to reading the whole sentence and they got it. They read every word on focus because that part it's running out. You can look at 3 trees and you just say 3, while you see people who are going through Alzheimer, they tell you 1, 2, 3 trees. With music, you have an override because it goes directly into it surpasses that pathway altogether, which is easier for the brain. So that's one aspect of it. And also David mentioned earlier the amygdala and the hippocampus, which is inside the brain. And he decided not to talk about them, but these are parts of the brain that in a very complex and still not fully understandable way, restore and recover memory. And it was discovered by science that music actually, the way it's stored, and it's much easier to recover music than other form of text. So that's why someone with Alzheimer or someone who's going through memory loss, they cannot speak, and you notice that. But then you start them on a song and they sing beautifully, every single word, no mistake, because the amygdala, and then of course add to that the complex factors that David referred to, which includes the experience. And even though they may not, that's why also older people and people going through Alzheimer, they have the long-term memory and not the short-term, because the short-term memory is new learning. The long-term memory is already there, it's easier accessible. And music can reach those parts much easier, and it overrides other systems. Thank
Wonderful.
you. I just wanted to highlight that part.
Wonderful, beautifully put. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Next up is going to be Scott.
Yeah, I'm also interested in this topic of memory and repetition. And it occurred to me a while back that like modern pop music and even hip hop, I have to say even because African-American music is the only indigenous music in North America. The rest of it's all European. So slave music became blues, became jazz. Everyone knows this. And jazz is very complicated and interesting. But, you know, music today is so crappily repetitive. You have musical subjects that are like 2 or 3 notes long, and you just hit repeat on a sequencer, and that's the whole freaking song, and they're just talking over it. And this reminded me that once upon a time, this is what I wanted to talk about. David mentions this idea. So, and the fugue is a perfect model for this. And when I imagine David lecturing on this topic next time, you probably use the fugue as a model, because in the fugue, you have a subject and it's treated like a protagonist. It's like, let's say you take the C minor, which is the only one I can remember offhand. That's your subject. Now you can take that, you can repeat it, you can raise it a fifth, lower it a fifth, you can invert it, you can take the first half of it and have it have children. You can go through all these permutations. It leaves home like Odysseus. And the joy of it is getting lost from the original theme. The more distant, but there might be a tiniest taint or residue that retains the fugal subject somewhere down the road. But then at the end, Odysseus comes home, having been enriched by his leaving himself and having gone this unpacking and this twisting and this mutation, only to return back to his original form. What a great thing that is. Where is that today? Back when I was a kid, you had to remember the fugal subject so that you could appreciate the journey that is taken. You had to have the theme in mind, and you were doing a differential relation to it as the music went on. Now you have a 3-note subject forever for 5 minutes, and it's a piece of crap. And therefore, modern music is counter-revolutionary and makes people slavish.
Okay. You know what? I think that we definitely will have another music lecture, because I'm nominating Scott to give the next music discussion.
Scott, you're welcome. You're welcome to join. You're welcome to lecture anytime. Just send me a message. Let's do it.
The reason that you only have 3 chords in modern music is because the people that are inventing these songs, they only know 3 chords. They can't read the music. Everything is electronic. They doctor everything up. You give them 3 chords, they can make a whole thing out of it. If you are flat when you sing, electronics will make you sound like you're on key. You don't have to know anything to write music nowadays. And that also goes to your next question about why is modern music like that? Well, look at modern painting. Same thing. They'll hang a broom on a wall and they'll say that's a picture. I mean, everything is very simplistic nowadays. We need a Mozart to correct it.
Wonderful. Scott, I really, really like your example of the motive going away, doing the travels, and Odysseus coming back home with the richness of all the travel. I want to give you the equivalent of that in Indian classical music. Just like David was talking about the motive as being the seed from which this entire growth takes place. In Indian rag, it's called the pakad. Pakad literally means something that you can hold, get the whole, hold off. So it's the thing with which you hold the whole. But it's a very small motive. And you sing 45 minutes, you do 45 minutes of improvisation, starting with that. And you're going all over the place, but with that as the focal point, a point to which a beacon, and a focal point towards which you keep coming back. You have this very rich development using the scale. The scale actually helps you, and the combination of the way in which you do the notes of the scale helps you, which is consonant with the pakad. And then you keep coming back. And so it's the same idea, but it is all done improvisationally. So that's like you're being a composer and a performer at the same time with a very small understanding. But what you need to do is that, just like the Western composers, you really need to know what the rag is. You spend your entire life studying rags, of saying, how do you express this kind of emotion? Because rag is trying to capture a particular emotion. What are the various phases of these emotions? And using this, you do all this improvisation. And again, the way in which the great musicians approach this is that they say that for them, it's a spiritual experience. And they are saying there is infinite variety, infinite richness possible here. And I'm still at 880 and being at the top of the profession, they say, I'm learning how to do justice to this rag. And every day they sit down to perform, it's basically between them and God, or them and this rag, and they're trying to do their best. And that's how the Indian music tradition is. All right, next up is Joe.
Actually, my question was kind of indirectly answered. It was just, how does technology impact music today? Like, how has it changed music over time specifically? And we kind of spoken to that, and that could be another meetup onto itself, I understand. So just maybe if you had some quick thoughts, but Maxine really kind of captured it in her answer as well.
Yeah, I'll say a little something. I think it's sort of a shame that right now when you go, I don't know now, 2 years ago, we go to the ballet, sometimes they'll be using a CD instead of a live performance. It's just the character of what's going on. There's a difference in live music and something that's recorded and put there. It may be brilliant what's put down, but there's something about being in the presence of the breathing human doing it. And it's not the perfection of notes or can it be as perfect as Glenn Gould's recording? It's the scratchiness. It's the, what are they pushing, to, it's like a performance in sports, it's like, how far can they go? Now you lose that when you turn it over to technology. And the technology is very powerful because as Maxine was saying, it can do all the chords. You don't even know what necessarily those notes are if you're just using the machine to do the chords. So you don't develop the inner work, the effort to know those shapes and know exactly what you can bend in it. You can bend any individual note and it's a different piece. So the subtleties, like you listen to the Beatles, they don't just play, the obvious chords, they play around with stuff, and that's why it's so, enormously engaging, right? So we lose that when we turn it over to the machine, because the machine will do it perfectly, whatever it's told.
Wonderful. Iman had a question about improvisation. So let's talk about improvisation in music. So David and Maxine.
Hey, Maxine, what you got?
Oh, okay. All right. Before I answer the question, that there is not, you can't do a 440 anymore to tune an A. They are lowering it now. So yes, so that people will be more in tune.
The Russians went lower first.
Yes. But jazz uses a lot of improvisation. Not classical music so much, but all the jazz musicians are using improvisation. That is usually how, if you ask them to repeat the piece that they have just played, they can't. It's gone forever, because when you use improvisation, you either have to record it, and then you have to get somebody to notate it for you. And then a lot of the musicians that are playing jazz can't read the music to play it back to you. It's creativity that's involved with jazz, but it's a shame. It's like when you have a wonderful thing and you want to remember it and you can't, and there isn't any one way to bring it back. And that is the problem with improvisation. Now, a lot of music, you improv it first and then write the piece of music, and then you can change it around, you can fix it. But guess what? Most of the people, they're just writing their 3-chord piece, and there really isn't anything they can do to get it back.
Well, yeah, and you think about it, the composition of a piece is an improvisation when you first write it. And
that's right.
The thing about, they don't train classical musicians in improvisation. It used to be part of classical music. I mean, if you look at a piece in 17th century, Corelli, just one note and then like a mark over, go crazy. And if you listen to, well, let's not go back. So it's not really
that's a cadenza. They throw in a cadenza so you can improvise.
Yeah, but entire sonatas of Corelli, it's all improvisation all the way through it. Now, yeah, and then it became, well, that's a challenge for the musician, and you have a moment of pause when you've built up to a moment, and then you let the musician go crazy, and they do something on the piano or their instrument. That skill is not something we train classical musicians to do, and that's why you listen to Yo-Yo Ma or Isaac Perlman playing something like tango, which requires improvisation. You go, this is sort of dead. They're brilliant. They play everything you would write down, but it's not they reach into their instrument to create something new necessarily. That's something they have to learn in addition to their perfection skill of reading, which is what Evelyn and Glenny showed us. They're not just dumb readers. They read with expression and full intention. But to create the sound, to know where to reach and to modulate and what you're going to go for, that's a different skill, and we don't train them. Now, on the other hand, as Maxine said, the balance in jazz is a little different. It's all towards the hearing and not so much towards the writing. But I think Irving Berlin also couldn't read anything except one key, like in C major. So he had a piano made that he could shift it to be an F sharp if he needed it. But
next up,
all the skills.
Yeah. Next up is going to be Scott, followed by Evelyn. Scott.
So I don't know if you know about this, but there's a real easy way to make music now. It's a little square box that you buy with a bunch of cells in it. and you set a dial and it changes the rhythm. So you have a column of lights moving left to right, repeat, left to right, left to right. And the rows are all different notes, but it's like pentatonic or something, so you can't have bad dissonance. So what you do is you just randomly press squares on this grid and it goes dun 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 dun. If you leave one blank, it'll go dun 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 dun, and it'll leave spaces. And then, but so that's enough for you to make a whole music just by flicking water at this thing. You make a composition. No, but then you can take this square and you can connect it to a computer, and the computer will provide all the connective tissue and the remember when you took music theory class, you had to do the voice leading with the Roman numerals, the bass line. So it had to be, you know, in Western music, there's a formula: 3 goes to 2, 4, 6, and those guys go to 5 and 7, and 5 and 7 always go to 1, right? This is the rules. So there's computer equipment that can fill all this stuff into you. So now all you have to do is flick water at a square, plug it into a computer, and it'll make a 4-part symphony perfectly symmetrical with all the expected cliches and motifs and tropes of Western music history. And you could say that you're a composer. I don't know how I feel about all that.
Thank you, Scott. Next up is Evelyn.
Yeah, I was thinking of the improv that Maxine was talking about earlier. And one of the things I was thinking of is artists that really didn't have any type of training but are great. And usually when I think of that, I think of hip hop artists like Jay-Z, back in the 70s and 80s. I don't know if anybody even remembers this, but Sugar Hill Gang and all those people, they didn't have musical training, so they didn't know the notes or anything like that. But they emoted emotion. They were telling their story. So when I was thinking of the improv, I was thinking of that, and I was like, but is the music in a sense purer because it's from an emotional? Is it pure because it is from your emotion and it is from your life experience? Like even with Mozart, even though he had classical training, it was still from his heart. And just like Scott was describing earlier, you know, now you have the box that you can throw water at in composition, but I think it takes away the emotion. So I'm wondering, like, how much does, you know, classical training and all that add to the emotion and take away from it? So I guess that's
wonderful. So we'll get to it. Let's Maritza is next. Maritza.
Oh, I was gonna piggyback off of what Evelyn just said.
Go ahead.
And Scott, in that, you know, it makes me think of dancing, and a couple of you probably have heard me whine about this before, about the fact that, you know, salsa became very popular now in this country, and anybody can go and they can become proficient at dancing salsa. Out of curiosity, I went to go check out some salsa lessons. Just so you guys know, I learned how to dance salsa when I was about 4 in the kitchen with my mother, because she danced salsa while she cooked. And I have been in several different salsa dance groups. But anyway, for funsies, I decided to go learn salsa. And they started off with no music, telling me that salsa was 8 steps. Salsa has 4 steps, unless you break it apart very, very slowly and confusingly. And so what it makes me think of is this concept of music. There is a way that perhaps the intention is honest, and the goal is to know something. But I like to make the distinction between to know and to understand. And that's what I'm hearing here. You know, if a drum circle is feeling off of each other to compose the next portion of the drum music, that's just not really something you can replicate easily with a little device or a box. You can get the technical aspect of the notes perfect, but the feeling, the proud, it's like the example that David gave us earlier with the drum. You know, she said, if I follow exactly what I'm reading, this is it. And then she goes, and then she shows us, but if I make it my own, and you could just hear it, you could have closed your eyes and not heard anything else she said. And if they had played for you the first one and the second one, invariably, we all would have determined that the second one was richer. And that's because that, and I'm sad Charlie's gone, because there is, to me, that's the ineffable part, where we add our own. By our to go off script is the best way to show understanding more than just knowing. And I think that we see that a lot with, we see that being lost a lot with so many things making music, dance, and stuff that should be felt. It's making it so easy to have the trappings of understanding without the work of understanding.
See, I come from the Indian tradition of Indian classical music, where improvisation is what you do. So for example, in the Western, for me, Ella Fitzgerald is the goddess. Okay, it's like, and what she can do is like, and I like her term. Like she said, I stole everything, I steal everything. So it's like she listens to music, all of it gets into her. Okay, and she, like, I one of my favorite clips by her is that she's trying to show people what different kinds of music are like. And she takes like country music and hillbilly music and this music and that music, and she does it like no one else can do. Because the thing is that it's a question of the richness, like the preparation is so large, the love for music is so deep that you take in everything and you do it in such a massive quantity that you see the structure of it. So when you're doing a line, like it's the same piece. You hear it by Ella. It's not that she's trying to do something innovative. It's just that her expressive power is so large and so well developed. There are so many layers that she has put in her brain that when she sings, all of that richness is flowing. Everything is slightly different every time she comes at it, and it is completely consonant. And there is a variation. So there is a surprise. And all of that is built in just when she opens her mouth. And that is really, really powerful. And I think that's what music is all about. And even the great composers who did this, like Mozart and Beethoven, who sat down and wrote this, they had that ability themselves. Their ability of improvisation was at that level, and they're taking that and adding notation to it to build that. So I don't see that as a distinct. But next up is Evelyn.
Yeah, I want to add one thing to what you said.
Oh, please.
That there is this push-pull about technical development and freedom. And, Ella is a great example. She had such proficiency, so she could listen to something that she couldn't do yet and develop the changes she needed for that, because she was already highly developed in expressing things. You can't develop a subtlety of something that you haven't even developed the fundamental skill for. So, playing scales is not playing music, but you play scales and you do intending playing scales, because when you go playing scales in music, you want to do it with an ability to change it from what it was that you were practicing, because the energy that you let flow into it, you can't do that if you haven't already mastered the basic thing. Now, taking that to the extreme is training someone in being a reader of music, who are these proficient kids who can read the stuff, but it doesn't have the life you're talking about, the freedom, the craziness. So, it's like the developing and breaking the rules. First, you have to also recognize what are the rules and have at least that much structure so that you can bend it in a way that makes it an alteration of the starting point, not just something pieces put together, right? So you have to get the flow of that. And so the rules are not really practicing isn't a restriction to writing classically, but it's a guide to look how these can develop, and you can learn what Srikanth's talking about, the infinity of the varieties by exploring them.
You have to do it moment to moment, and that's what makes great music. You can have the same person play Mozart and another person sit next to them, and you're not affected by their Mozart, but you are by the first person's Mozart. They have to do moment to moment, and that's why you have an Itzhak Perlman who knows how to improvise. Even though it's structured music, he puts himself into the music, and you have that. So you're dealing with a moment to moment, like you do with acting, like you do with most things. You want the surprise, the unexpected that comes when you're doing your music.
Beautifully put. Thank you. Next up is Evelyn, followed by Mike. Evelyn.
Yeah, sure. When you were talking about the indie artist stealing music or, copying music, I think about it, and I think the best music does that. Like, you take from different artists. You take, like, I always use the example of Jay-Z again, because he could use classical music, Broadway music, and all these different types of genres, rock music, and things that you think wouldn't go together, and he would make it sing, like he would just make it pop. And I think that's the mark of a great artist, is that they can take from what they hear, they build on it, in a sense. It's not like they are deliberately stealing it. It's just that they're building on what they've heard in the past. I've heard of, Michael Jackson famously using all different types of genre. Like, again, he was another artist that could use all different types of music and bring it together and make his own unique style. And I think that's what a true artist does. They express themselves through their experiences, through stealing different types of music, through their experience. Like Maritza was talking about earlier, like she learned salsa from her mom in the kitchen. We learned to listen to music like when we were raised with our grandparents, and they played music and we danced, and that's how you learn to dance and sing and have all this fun and really express yourself. So I think good music, because if it's a true artist and not just a person who's trying to make money, but if it's a true artist, that's what music does. It it brings up an emotion. It moves you because of the emotion of the human being that is trying to express themselves. So that's what I think.
Thank you, Evelyn. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to Mike, and then I'm going to ask one last question for anybody who wants to answer. What does music at its best do for you? What does music do for you at the deepest level? Just brief answers, if you will. Mike.
Yeah, I wanted to know if either of you could comment on if you have music that is really not technical. Take somebody like Dylan, for example, who culturally can change so much. The music is not really complex, and I wouldn't say he was a classically trained vocalist, and his harmonica playing wasn't, you're not going to find him playing in a blues harp band in New Orleans yet. Somebody like Dylan can have such a change. And how about somebody like Ray Charles, whose voice can't be replicated? And if you break down basic blues progressions in his music, a lot of it is 3 chords, yet his style can't be replicated. And it's mind-blowing how much emotion that music produces. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. So now let's close with anybody who wants to speak very briefly, less than a minute, on what does music do for you at its best. Evelyn.
It heals me.
Wonderful. Anybody else? Laura, what does music do for you? Laura, you need to unmute. Go ahead. Sorry, you're on mute.
music charges me. It lights me up inside. I love music.
Wonderful.
Jazz, 50s rock and roll gets me down.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Next up is Joe, Jing, and Maritza.
For me, it'll bring me peace and tranquility, and it'll also inspire me. And it has a way of allowing me to focus, like in a way that I wouldn't have been able to, so especially classical music.
Wonderful. Next up is Jing, Maritza, and B. Jing.
Yeah, I think music can speak to our emotion, exercise our emotion. They can bring back the memories.
Wonderful. Thank you. Maritza, what does music do for you?
Oh, it depends on the moments. Sometimes it is a memory saver because most people in my life get a theme song. And sometimes it is a soother. Sometimes it is a, an enabler. And all the emotions, I feel that all the emotions have their appropriate corresponding musical element for me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is B, followed by Ambika. B, what does music do for you?
So I would say a little bit of all of the above comments. When I play music, I can get into a state of euphoria, especially if I have enjoyed maybe a sati or a more minimalist piece. And when I listen, it's a whole range of emotions.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, B. Next up is Ambika.
So all of these things, of course. And can I say something about chanting?
Very briefly, go ahead.
Yeah, when I chant the Rudram, my whole body gets cleared. So, that's at night. It just clears up everything. Otherwise, music, it brings one home.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ambika. All right, so before I go to Maxine and David, let me tell you my pet point about music and art. I think that spectator sports and spectator art is not good enough. You really need to have participatory sports and participatory art. The more you actually try to produce art, even the attempt to produce art is going to enable you to appreciate the art very much more. So for me, music is primarily about singing, and I listen in order to sing. So that's how I approach music. So David, what does music do for you?
Well, I want to tie it a little to the question. Oh, he just left. Someone asked about those geniuses, and no, Michael asked. So yeah, you're sort of asking what is genius? How do people reach that? And I just got to say that's a whole different question. But I guess you can recognize it because the genius puts you there where the music can take you. So, I listen to music, and when there's a genius, it breaks my heart, something like that. You reach to somewhere that you couldn't imagine. But generally, music restores my soul. It sometimes, if I have enough energy, it makes me dance, and I guess in that sense, gives me a state of being. I feel some kind of completeness in connecting with the universe. It sounds, like I said, not many words will help me here.
Wonderful. Maxine, what about you?
It gives me a path to follow. It's a tool. It gives me hope, because what else would you follow? I mean, I don't follow the philosophers. I know who they are, but music does more for me than they do. Music is immediate, and I can find my path immediately. I don't have to look back. I don't have to look forward. I just have to look. And then that will help me with many questions that are unanswered.
Wow. So folks, Maxine and David, that was just an amazing, amazing presentation. I don't know whether it is because I love music as much or whether on the top of that, you guys did a fantastic, both of you. I mean, Maxine's, kind of just, music is in her and it's a core part of her being. And she's just spoke about that. And that was huge. And David's ability to kind of conceptualize about music is just incredible. There are still kind of themes in my mind, which I'm just still going through, like rhythm as being the foundation, that mind, you're making time with it. Mind is all about time, and how music is intimately connected with that. And those are just kind of the beginnings. So it's very, very rich, and it's one of my favorite presentations and David, I've done about 600 of these. So it was pretty good. It was pretty good. So thank you so much, both of you. And thank you very much for everybody. I just want to tell you very quickly what's coming up next. Comprehensivist Wednesdays, we are going to do Queen's Gambit. Mike is going to have one of his friends who is an international master, and she and Mike are going to be talking about chess and thinking and comprehensivism. So that's what is coming up. We've got these 3 incredible meetups on foundations of the West, China, and India that we are doing. And those are breaking completely new grounds. That's Tao Te Ching that we are almost halfway through. Bible, which we have just started, which are just spectacular meetups. And I'm about to begin Bhagavad Gita. All of these, we are kind of trying to navigate it at a very deep level. So I welcome you to join any of those or all of those. And it's always wonderful. And I'm so grateful to have such great quality of people coming and talking. So thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
Thanks, everyone, for coming. Thanks a lot.
When is the Bhagavad Gita starting?
What's that?
When is Bhagavad Gita starting?
Bhagavad Gita is starting 1 week from Friday. So the Bible meetup, the Gospel of John, I'm moving it to Thursday. This time, and only this time, it is at 8 p.m. Otherwise, it will go back to 9 p.m. And then I'm not starting Bhagavad Gita this Friday, but Friday after that. And I'm going to announce it very, very soon. And it's going to be very challenging. I'm going to, it is a very difficult, Bhagavad Gita is going to be probably the most challenging of the 3. And I'm going to use a translation by a gentleman called Sri Aurobindo. He's one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century in India, like one of the top 5 thinkers, according to almost everybody who is familiar with Indian philosophy. So I just want to go directly to him and his interpretation. I will be trying to read it in Sanskrit, and because I can do about 85% Sanskrit, and I have a Marathi translation which is rooted in Sanskrit. So I'm going to be trying to read that, and it's going to be the most challenging meetup that I have done. So I would recommend getting the book, Sri Aurobindo's book. There is another one by Eknath somebody, which is also very popular, but I prefer this one. Okay, so that's what I would recommend. All right, folks. So thank you very much, everybody. Good night. Bye.